We had previously talked about Batman in our previous video involving the Through the Arrowverse. It's time to talk about the thing that is directly connected to it. Besides the multitude of shows that made cameos, one of those happens to be the Green Hornet. But before we talk about that show, we gotta talk about what the Green Hornet is at all. Some people might only know two things about the Green Hornet. One, that it was a show at around the same time as the Adam West Batman show, and two, that it was a garbage movie in 2011 that starred Seth Rogen Donkey Kong. Green Hornet is a superhero created in 1936 by George W. Trendle and Frank Stryker, with input from radio director James Jewell. Since his 1930s radio debut, the character has appeared in numerous serialized drama with a wide variety of media. The Green Hornet not only appeared in multiple film serials in the 1940s and alongside the 1960s show, which of course stars Bruce Lee, and then the mentioned 2011 movie. But majorly started out as a radio program that premiered January 31st, 1936. It went on for quite a while in the 1930s as one of those several pulp heroes that are just kind of guys with masks that would go out and punch the bad guys, mostly Nazis, and guys that would cause lots of problems. The point of the Green Hornet is ultimately to play towards a different aspect of what several of those heroes were. When they were just kind of guys of legendary nature who would go out and fight for good, the Green Hornet was a little bit darker. He would be thought as a criminal for a good majority of the public and would kind of use this as a way to get into the dealings of the criminals and would try to take them out from the inside, and it would work a lot for some reason. There would be several comic books based upon these early radio shows as translations, and alongside other extra stories made for just the comics. The series, for the most part, is about Britt Reed. Britt Reed is a man who works for the Daily Sentinel, who after his father was killed, he took up the ownership of the Daily Sentinel and became the Green Hornet alongside Kato, a martial arts expert that basically taught him how to fight. There is a really cool origin story of the recent comics that have been published that tells you the exact origins of the Green Hornet. The recent owners of the comics, Dynamite Entertainment, has made multiple Green Hornet comics alongside the owners of the comics, that being during the 80s and 90s, have told a multi-generational tale of multiple Green Hornets. We have the awesome origin story that shows off how exactly Britt Reed became the Green Hornet and met Kato, and how the two of their family lines have been connected in the many years since. Later on, the 1960s Britt Reed that we see in this TV show is in fact Britt Reed II, not Jr. He's the nephew of the original Britt Reed from the 30s, who may or may not have also been canon to the show. The show is canon to the Now Comics storyline, but obviously I'm pretty sure the show wasn't thinking about that during the time. His Kato is the first Kato's son, so there's kind of that. But yeah, the two Britt Reeds aren't the only Green Hornets. There is the other Reeds that are directly connected to them. Alan Reed would become the Green Hornet, and after being killed on his first mission, he would be replaced by his brother Paul Reed, who would then team up with Mishi Kato, the younger half-sister of the newer Kato trained by the original. So Lily, for some reason, would like trade her out because the editors thought that a woman could never possibly be the teammate of a Green Hornet, which made no sense to me, but alright, whatever. But as mentioned, eventually Dynamite Entertainment would get the rights to the comics, and alongside going back into more adventures of the originals, they would get into a more recent one, which would be the original Britt Reed's son, who would take over from his father. It's unclear whether or not the other Green Hornets are canon to this, considering they probably don't have the rights to these characters, but who knows? Maybe it's the case. What's important here is that the movie that I will mention a little bit later on was supposed to originally being made by Kevin Smith, but they never went with his original script, and it's a whole tale I'll get to in a minute, but his original script would be the basis of not only this Green Hornet, but his Kato, the daughter of the original Kato, Mulan Kato, who in more recent comics has even also become the new Green Hornet. So it's pretty cool. But more importantly, he's related to the Lone Ranger? Yes, actually. Now, while I would love to, just go into a whole thing about the Lone Ranger, and maybe even, go into a whole topic of making fun of the one with Johnny Depp in it, there's no mention of the Lone Ranger in this show, as far as I can tell, unless I missed it at some point. So unless you're really talking about the comics, which obviously this show isn't specifically canon to that, then the only Green Hornet we're really going to talk about for a majority of this thing is the 1960s Green Hornet. The important part about this Green Hornet TV show is it is produced by the exact same guy who did the 60s Batman show, that being William Dozier, who of course also narrates this show. Now, not in the way that he narrates the 60s Batman show, as this show takes itself a lot more seriously. The 60s Batman is clearly made for a younger audience, while this one was a real big attempt to make something much more serious. William Dozier does do the intro, and a very notable intro, where he says the same thing every episode, so if you watch it, you'll definitely be in your head by the end of it. And alongside the mentioned Bruce Lee, which would basically bring him into the zeitgeist of American culture, it starred Van Williams as the titular Green Hornet / Britt Reed. As the original one did, would drive their armored and gadgeted up car, the Black Beauty, which looks awesome, and it's really cool that it still exists, and you can find it in certain car shows. Honestly, seeing fictional cars just being like straddled out and being looked at for the public is always really cool, even if for the most part it's things from all the way back then, where it's kind of a lot of grandpas going, yes, I remember when that was on TV. Now, here's the thing about the Green Hornet. It's kind of boring. Now, am I going to tell you that this show is bad? Absolutely not. The Green Hornet is, I feel like, a show that is pretty typical mystery action show of its time, right? Now, while it's obviously about masked men, it's clearly based upon comic book stuff, it's something that does try to take itself a little bit more seriously. It is definitely more of an actual mystery where the characters are trying to figure out what exactly is going on, who's the perpetrator of whatever murder may have happened in the beginning of the episode, who's the person who's behind whatever bank robberies are seemingly about to happen, yada yada. You know, it's your pretty typical, that thing has happened, who's behind it? The Green Hornet's gonna find out. Well, the Green Hornet's gonna sneak in, he's gonna talk to the villains, he's gonna go, I want a cut of the thing that you're gonna do. And they're like, well, might as well, you have a gun to my face. Fine, I guess. And it ends up not working for them, and he ends up clocking guys in the face in a pretty similarly, like, made way to how the 60s Batman is. Like, the blocking is very similar till, like, clearly halfway in the show when they give Kato his whole-on episode, where they finally let Bruce Lee, like, actually do karate stuff, you know? I'm gonna say martial arts. It's not karate. It's Jeet Kune Do, actually. I know what he did, but I think at this point he was still kind of developing it, so it might actually be Wing Chun as taught to him by his teacher, Ip Man, who, of course, has his own series of movies, played by another great martial artist actor. So, that's the whole thing. So, saying all of that is way more interesting than the actual show, though. Because a lot of the time, a lot of these episodes, though I do feel that they're definitely well written and well paced, and there is a clear showing of that the people behind this show have a real understanding of how to frame a live action TV show. A lot of the time, there isn't a lot of like notable characters or notable things going on, right? Now, the only thing notable is, of course, the Green Hornet themselves. Britt Reed is a very fun character who has a very clear, like, separation between the just sort of very normal, like, you know, Bruce Wayne-esque, your typical playboy guy who's trying to lead this newspaper, like a good J. Jonah Jameson type thing. And then the separation between the clearly more serious and ready to beat up guys, a Green Hornet, right? Kato, the fact that they didn't give Bruce Lee many lines, there is a clear difference, but there is a definite, like, menace that is shown through the just quick changes to the masks, you know? The whole look of it is actively different than the original one, though technically sometimes it is shown as that sort of mask. The original actually had a very different kind of mask that people really forget was a thing until the, like, more recent comics really brought it back to the forefront. But there's a reason why the domino masks just work better, because there's a more menace to it. If you really add in those eyebrows, you are genuinely intimidated by this sort of figure, especially with it when it is staring right at you in the face with a knockout gun. Yeah, it's not like a real gun, though the Green Hornet does have this little, like, taser that he uses sometimes. Of course, you know, Kato, though alongside throwing stars, also can just beat up guys. The main thing about the Green Hornet is that he can just shoot you with knockout gas, and that's what he does. But yeah, despite the fact that this tries to take itself a lot more seriously, it's still structured in the exact same way as the Batman show. They try to figure it out, they meet up with the bad guys, they almost sort of figure it out, and then they go back to their normal lives to continue trying to figure it out, have dialogue with the regular characters who are vaguely affected by the events here. Then they fight the bad guys, and then they catch the bad guys. The difference between these two shows is that it isn't two separate episodes. In fact, there is only a certain number of episodes and one singular season for the Green Hornet. Though there was a clear attempt to try and make another season, there was only ever 26 episodes made for this show, and all of them feel pretty similar. Honestly, there isn't really much to bring up about this show. There isn't a lot of other notable characters besides some of the supporting cast members. There's Reed's secretary, Lenora Casey Case, who does, even though she doesn't make it very clear, does know about the identity of the Green Hornet. It's something I actually didn't realize till maybe like the end of the show, where I was like, oh, I guess she knows. Of the two people that know about the Green Hornet being District Attorney Frank P. Scanlon, who in the original comics and radio play is, of course, the police commissioner, which they changed in order to make it a lot less like Batman. And it's possible that when you also consider the whole comics canon of this is probably connected to the originals, this is probably just the same guy that helped his uncle back in his 30s. Same goes for Mike Axford, a police reporter who works for the Daily Sentinel, who repeatedly mentions the dead from off-screen Onitis, father of Britt Reed II, and constantly implies that he may also know about the Green Hornet, but probably doesn't, considering he constantly wants to catch the Green Hornet. If his father was also some Green Hornet, which, you know what, if I had the chance to write for Green Hornet stuff, I would just be like, sure. But that's it. There's no other, like, really recurring cast members besides those characters, and they're all pretty fine. They don't really have any arcs that go around, not even in any, like, couple episodes. With at least Batman, there was something to sort of work on. The fact that there was 2 episodes, there was time to really distribute the characters and their plots throughout it, so you could really extend that time. It worked, and even though obviously there was the jokes and the fight scenes that were more apparent in that show, that definitely made it have a reason why it was 2 episodes for each story for those first 2 seasons at least. Putting it into one kind of forces it to go pretty fast and forces it to end pretty fast too. None of the plans are all that interesting either. When it comes to these sort of episodic TV shows, I at least expect there to be some kind of new plan every time, but besides, we're going to steal some things and do some very basic criminal stuff. It's not all that interesting. If you're gonna commit crimes, I expect there to be something weird while you're doing it, or at least some kind of interesting character who has something to do. It's not like there isn't multiple parters, because there is a couple multi-parters. Episodes 7 and 8, 18 and 19, and the last 2, 25 and 26, are indeed 2-parters, and they're the most interesting and entertaining episodes due to that, due to the fact that they're able to actually extend their plot lines. That first 2-parter is also one of the most interesting episodes because it does have some weird thing to it about, like, hypnotizing people in a spa, so at least there's that. That second 2-parter is about someone trying to pretend to be the Green Hornet and literally has a carbon copy of the Black Beauty, which I'm surprised is even possible. The only really good episode is episode 10, The Praying Mantis, all about them going to the Chinatown District, which almost a little bit gets into the backstory of Kato and a little bit about him and where he comes from, but it doesn't really go that far into it, and it just ends up being, there are other Asians here, so Kato is better for the mission, I guess. It's almost like they really didn't want to go into any of these characters' feelings of these situations, or like any actual inner turmoil of anything that they were doing, or like any relationship problems, or any side characters that they could just bring up. Listen, sometimes I just like when there's randomly some, like, childhood friend where that just comes out of nowhere. And, you know, that sort of dumb thing I kind of live for, because at least there's something. At least I get a view at, like, what this character was at some point in their life. The last few episodes do get a little bit more interesting, especially with one where, like, a group of guys want to steal a tank. So that was kind of fun. I just want to mention real quickly, there's this episode about the Scarf, and he's some kind of, like, famous strangler called the Scarf, and that's really it. The rest of the episode's kind of boring. It's just cool that he was a thing. Just look at the guy. But the episode that I really want to talk about is the last 2, just due to the fact that it began actually very interesting, and then quickly became boring. You know what happened in the last couple episodes? Aliens. Honest to God, aliens just exist now. They show up, they threaten the world, and they abduct the Green Hornet and his girlfriend, and you're like, what is going on? There is aliens, honest to God aliens, in the last 2 episodes. Clearly, it feels like they wanted to be a little bit more spectacular, so they could give more of a reason to get a second season. And then at the end of the episode, and for the entirety of the next one, is just people. It's people that pretended to be aliens, and they have a nuke, which they end up not being able to use, because why would they be able to do that? Which was so disappointing. I was so hoping for just real aliens. Like, give me something, Green Hornet television show. I hate, like, not being able to say anything about it, but that's just the case. I'm sorry. Like, here's the thing. If you really enjoy this kind of slow-paced, mystery drama like shows that ultimately don't go that much into any character development, but are more about some kind of interesting noir style, and it's a show that is a much older type of show, then you can go ahead. This is definitely that kind of show for you, but this is definitely not the show for a good majority of people. There is a reason it lasted for one season, and that sucks, because the Green Hornet can be very interesting. I don't need some kind of like continuing plot line for a thing to be interesting. I don't need necessarily any kind of weird mystical or superhero-y stuff for a superhero thing to be interesting. So obviously the Green Hornet, as what it is, isn't necessarily my style of superhero. I feel like there is definitely stories that can be told with this character that have been told very well. That just isn't necessarily what the 1960s show is. I'm sorry. I like the characters, I sure as shit like their car, but what I can tell you is the best time with the Green Hornet and Bruce Lee's Kato is the crossover with Batman. Now, while a King Tut, because there was a villain who thought he was King Tut, and moving on, that was, of course, where their window cameo was, which implied that they could just easily get to Gotham, and they just were there sometimes. One of these times that they easily got to Gotham was a piece of the action, and its second part, Batman Satisfaction. Very similar, by the way. These two shows have the worst titles, you know? It's funny to look at, like, the title of the episodes for some of these shows and be like, what are you talking about? Well, that is especially the case for both of these shows. Just get that out of the way. When you look at these titles and you're like, man, I wonder what Green Hornet and the Firefly could be. Is that some other villain who has some kind of, like, powers of his own? No, it's just some arsonist. But regardless of these bad episode titles, the actual storyline itself, the two-parter, where they take on the vaguely recurring villain who's trying to take over this stamp factory, don't ask, is a very entertaining one, where ultimately both the Green Hornet and Batman have their own scenes separately as they try and look into this weird secret plan, as they try to infiltrate it in their own ways, and also share scenes together, not only as their superhero guises, but also as Britt Reed and Bruce Wayne. Both are kind of going on this shared date with the owner of the stamp factory, who's like Pinky something, whatever. You have these very funny scenes where the two, we find out they were childhood friends, where more than likely they were part of the same kind of golfing club that their rich parents probably put them in. So they knew each other and were rivals since childhood. And I really like that they've known each other for a very, very long time. And you can sort of see through that they have a shared background, and you can see through that why they have very similar personalities and why they would be rivals. This on its own gives you a lot of immediate character development for Britt Reed. I went into the Green Hornet show already having watched this episode, thinking we'd see more of this style, and in ways we do, but we see less of the more fun Britt Reed and more of the serious Britt Reed who's being like the Green Hornet. I would be fine with a little bit more of personality, a little bit more goofiness, even if not necessarily the like, gotta make a quip every scene, you know? Some just like levity and some character, a little bit more of it besides the beginning and end of the episodes would have been much better. And that's why I really prefer this appearance in Batman than I do the entirety of the show of the Green Hornet. We get like a lot of dialogue between Britt Reed and Kato and Britt Reed and Bruce Wayne, and we get more actual like character depth with Britt Reed in these two episodes, in this crossover, than we do in the entirety of the show. I really like this version of Britt Reed and Kato. I could take them seriously as like genuine superheroes who are pretending to be criminals, and I understand what they're trying to do way more than the kind of boring nothing of characters that they were in the original show. Plus, as it goes on, not only do we get to see the Green Hornet and Batman come to an understanding of, they don't agree that what they're doing with each other, but they do see that there is a good side to them, and Batman and Robin learn that the Green Hornet and Kato are actually on the good guy's side. Also, Bruce Lee totally punches Robin in the face, and that's awesome. Importantly, we see Bruce Wayne and Britt Reed come to an understanding, which is really cool. We see that they really like begin to grow a respect to one another, as they see that they're not just two rich D-bags just kind of like living it up. You know, they both have their own struggles and their own purposes, and they do their own thing. And though they clearly don't know that each other are the superheroes that they've also met that day, it's clear that if they ever did, they'd probably be fine with it. And I really like that. It continues the character growth of they have a very similar background and they have come into a very similar sense of justice. They both have their own way of doing it and they respect each other for doing that, even if they themselves wouldn't do that. And I really like that. Again, so much more interesting in this goofier kids show than the much serious adult show that lasted a single season. I don't know, man. There was clearly a lot more room for actual imagination and character growth in the original Batman that there was in the original Green Hornet. It's clear that the producers just wanted to, like, keep it for themselves and not go out of the realm of impossibility, which ended up sort of keeping it from being all that interesting. And that's the big flaw with the original 1960s show. It wasn't able to expand to more interesting stuff. Now, you do have to keep a limit on that sort of thing when you want to make this kind of show. That's a more serious cop drama. But sometimes you gotta just go for it, you know? And while it may have not been the Alien two-parter at the end there, especially if it ended up being real aliens, which, God, I wish it was. Just because it was the last episode, so just give me something. But, you know, going forward, keeping it, like, longer, and just letting, like, actual character development happen naturally, bringing in characters that they knew from when they were younger again, something. There needed to be more than what there was, and it never happened. That's the reason why the original 1960s Green Hornet show ended up failing spectacularly. However, if you really want extra context to who Britt Reed is, like, during your Adam West Batman experience, I would recommend watching the original Green Hornet. I can't recommend it just on its own, though. It's not the best show of all time, but I don't think it's something you should stray away from completely, especially because I feel like the Green Hornet as an idea is really cool. I would recommend getting into Green Hornet in general, right? A little bit of the 60s show, but definitely look into those, like, original older comics, which are still fine, but certainly the ones from Now Comics and from Dynamite Comics especially, which have a lot of great writing and very interesting characters that bound off of the ideas from this earlier Green Hornet stuff. When you know the legacy of what this is and what they're trying to bounce off from, it really adds to those storylines and makes them even better. That's sort of the point of what I'm trying to get at here. The original, on its own, not great, but it really builds a legacy which makes newer comics much more interesting. This kind of became less of a, here's what to watch in the big expanded Arrowverse and the vague relation to Adam West Batman, and more about, like, this other superhero stuff, which is you've probably never heard of, which you should totally get into, in all honesty.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
Alright, now for the little side note of the Seth Rogen Donkey Kong Green Hornet. I did watch it because I was curious. Now, keep in mind, the Green Hornet is something I didn't know about when I was younger, right? I knew Adam West Batman. I grew up with Adam West Batman. But I did not know the Green Hornet as a thing, right? I didn't watch every episode when I was younger. Didn't watch that episode when I was younger. Till more recently, that's when I found out about that the Green Hornet was a thing more than the Seth Rogen one, right? The Seth Rogen 2011 Green Hornet movie was made in the middle of developing one, which the development starting in the early 2000s, again, was about to be a movie made by the very nerdy, very notable director Kevin Smith. But they ended up taking so long that he ended up just passing on them ever using his script, and he started working with Dynamite Entertainment and made his own script into the comics there. He can do that. Mostly because someone else then bought the movie rights to it and made their own thing, and that guy's idea was to hire Seth Rogen. Why? I have not a single idea. Seth Rogen was still a comedy guy at that point. I don't know why you picked Seth Rogen, and I get why they picked the actor who they picked for Kato, but even then, oh my god. Again, this was my introduction to the Green Hornet. I didn't know about the original show or comics till semi-recently, and so this is all I knew, was this bad superhero movie that nobody liked back in 2011 that was trying to, like, bank on the superhero craze, the first superhero craze during the late 2000s, early 2010s, and it just failed spectacularly and everyone joked about it. But for years I never knew and was always curious until God recently, and I wish I didn't. Now, there was a couple moments, which I have now completely forgotten, where it did end up getting a laugh from me, but it was like 2 times out of a whole hour and a half, and the rest of it was painful garbage that, like, the movie didn't feel like it begun till, like, the end of it, and when it finally really begun, where they really had their origin story of their first actual mission defeating their first actual villain, by that point, where they finally like gained the trust of their secretary, the movie was done. And it was like, the fuck was that? Seth Rogen, I think, can be a funny guy, but he sure as shit is not funny in this. They ended up turning Britt Reed, who's just Britt Reed in this. There's no extra canon thing here. He's not added to the, like, lineage of things here, unless there happens to be another Britt Reed somewhere who's maybe related to these guys. I don't know. But the Seth Rogen Britt Reed is this big done man baby, which specifically the Britt Reeds of past were trying to not be, right? They never even tried to be that in like their human disguise. They always tried to be like hardworking people who had a point in society, even when they weren't the Green Hornet. So they literally just copied Iron Man. And then his dad, who you literally meet in the first 5 minutes, dies immediately. And that's supposed to be enough of a reason why he becomes a Green Hornet, except it isn't, because he then meets up with the guy who was supposed to do his coffee, who ends up just being cool also, and they get drunk, and that's the reason they become the Green Hornet. They just dress up, and they just end up fighting some bad guys, and they get on the news for a police chase, and due to this, they feel they could just use this to maybe beat up some other bad guys, because it was fun to do it. So they end up just trying so hard, really painfully, unfunnily hard, to push themselves as bad guys on the news, which of course, you know, they are still with the Daily Sentinel, so there's that. And for the next like 30 minutes, they do the whole like origin story. We're gonna figure out what this gun does, haha. And he ends up, like in one scene, he finds the like knockout gas gun. He gets knocked out by it, and supposedly he's been knocked out for like 2 weeks. And Kato put him in diapers, and it's like, what's the fucking joke here? I almost stopped at that point, but I kept going like an idiot, and they literally picked some great actors to be just some absolute buffoons the whole entire movie, one of whom is the main villain, and I cannot believe this man, who I know can do some great acting, keeps starring in bad movies that I keep seeing him in, where he ends up playing total idiots. Why? And that's his whole thing, is that he's trying to be this mob boss who supposedly isn't intimidating, even though I know this actor can be intimidating. So that's bullshit. They beat him incredibly quickly. It's not fun. It's not entertaining. It just, God, it's so bad. It's so awful. I hate it so much. I hate it. Oh my God. If you want to watch the Green Hornet stuff, watch the original 60s. Hell, watch the 40s movies, which are the most boring movies from the 40s ever. Never. Oh my God, never watch what is probably the worst superhero movie I've seen in my life. Listen, you can point out whatever movie you want, especially from recent times, like Eternals, and say that it's the worst. That's because you've not seen Seth Rogen's Green Hornet. It is that bad. It is so awful. Every actor there has done better movies. Every movie they've ever done is better than that movie. I swear to God. But yeah, if you want to watch Green Hornet stuff, watch the original 60s Green Hornet, and then especially get into its extra comics. But for the most part, if you want to really continue with the Arrowverse watch through, you really only gotta just watch the original Adam West Batman for reasons I've talked about in my previous video. But if you want to, you can kind of shove in right before the main Batman movie, right in the watch order, right after the first 2 seasons of the Adam West Batman, the 26 episodes, or at least some of them, of the 60s Green Hornet. But more importantly, you can go into the next part of our Arrowverse watch through, which is a little bit more of familiar ground to people who are big fans of superhero stuff. One that a lot of people, I'm sure, don't really know about, and have only, like, seen through references. Here's a show that I had to watch the entirety of, and have lots of notes of how weird it is. Next, we're talking about the 70s Wonder Woman, starring Linda Carter. Cannot wait to get into this show and how absolutely bonkers it is. Until then, though, I hope you enjoyed this little go-through of what the Green Hornet is and why it's actually pretty cool. If you enjoyed this video, then leave that in the comments and leave any other ideas of superhero stuff I should get to as well. Definitely go ahead and check out my other videos, and make sure you subscribe for that next Wonder Woman video and any other thing I do in the future. But most importantly, stay good, stay safe, don't be an asshole.